Hi and welcome back to AMC Presents. My name is Lydia. Today, AMC's founder William Ford will be talking with composer Svjetlana Bukvich. Bukvich is an American Bosnian-Herzegovinian music composer, music producer, and media performance artist best known for her blending of classical music, media, and electronic music. Svjetlana Bukvich's music has been described as acoustic and performer-driven to electronic and theatrical, and often includes visual arts and microtonality, with tunings of her own design. She is one of the few female composers from Bosnia and Herzegovina working and performing in the US. And she incorporates musical and cultural influences of both. Svjetlana holds a bachelor's degree in musical composition, a Bachelor of Art in Musicology from Sarajevo University's Academy of Music and an M.F.A. in Integrated Electronic Arts from New York's Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She taught music technology at New York University Pratt Institute and is assistant professor at City University of New York. She is also faculty at the Microtonal University and is on the board of directors at the American Festival of Microtonal Music. Please join me in welcoming William and Svjetlana.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Hey, it's great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for having the time set aside in order for us to talk.
Yes, absolutely.
I actually have been in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
And I am very happy that you went to the southern parts as well, because Mostar is a real jewel of a city, and your little travelogues were very endearing to me because I saw that you experienced the place. There's so much to see within a relatively small geographical area, and I get surprised myself. I mean, I was born there and I left when I was 25, so going back, it's always a thrill because I discover something new that I didn't know.
Where exactly were you born in Bosnia?
Well, I was born in Sarajevo, the capital, and at that time it was the capital of a republic because the country was whole. It was called Yugoslavia. It was much bigger, and since the war in the 90s, since Yugoslavia separated into many different countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a sovereign country, and thus Sarajevo became the capital.
And how large was Sarajevo at the time? How many people?
Well, it was a nice city for its size. It offered quite a bit, about 750,000 people, and the town had an opera and an orchestra and everything that much bigger cities would have. Now it is a bit smaller, but these institutions are still up and running. So yeah, that's good news.
What was it like growing up for you there?
At the risk of sounding nostalgic, as all of us do when talking about one's youth, I will say that my growing up there was sort of like magic realism, really. I saw everything in Technicolor because the country had its sort of unique positioning geographically and politically. It didn't belong really to the East nor the West, and there was a lot of independent spirit which was felt in the arts. And the scene I grew up in had a mix of up, down, and downtown in New York terms daily. So we would as say students at the Academy of Music hang out with native instruments players, with rock bands, with opera singers, with musicians who have expressed in different tuning systems and also in different genres, if you wish. So I was constantly surrounded by a plethora of stimuli musically and was actively involved in a lot of these scenes. I would trade my chops as a keyboardist and vocalist so that I could get into the studio to record my stuff. At the same time, I was, classically trained and doing concertos with the Philharmonic, and then I was composing and being presented, elsewhere in then Yugoslavia as a young composer. So my life, I was also writing for TV and theater. My life was full, and I was happy with the amount of a talent there. What I wanted to learn was how to produce my own music. At the time, project studios weren't that common, and so as a female wannabe producer, I had to sit in these major TV studios where one had to be just a mouse and kind of sit and watch what's going on, but not really in any sort of student mentorship relationship. So that's why I was, doing the trading, the barter, so to speak, so that I can learn from the rock people what it means to be like in the studio, so that I could apply that to my classical and electronic avant-garde music aspirations at the time. So that is, I think, why I left to study in the US. And I thought that I was going to go back and apply what I've learned in terms of electronic music and the new music in the US, which I was very interested in. But then the war happened and I stayed, and now I go back every summer and I give back through different cultural exchanges and artistic collaborations.
Were your parents interested in music?
My dad was a self-taught guitarist and singer with a voice that attracted vocal contracts from TV stations and such. But his career was really in soccer and engineering. So he was a soccer star in his youth, and then went to college, one of the first of his generation, and then was a CEO of a, export-import firm and such. But I always sang with him, and we always sang as a family. At family gatherings, we would go, from republic to republic of the then Yugoslavia, and we would sing a Slovenian song and a Macedonian song and a Croatian song, Dalmatian on the coast. And my father, actually, since you visited that area, is from around Mostar. So for him, the coast and the Mediterranean influence was, with his lexicon, it was quite evident, right? And so he wasn't a trained musician, but music was always part of his life and our lives. And my mother, who's in education, she had a very good, as they tell me, musical memory. So the two of them were very much into the Sanremo Italian music festival, and they would know all the songs from the radio, and she would memorize all the lyrics, and he would play the guitar, and they had their circle of friends. So from what they tell me, they had a lot of fun, and music was part of their lives all the time, and that then translated to how myself and my sister felt about music. It was just all around us.
It was just part of your upbringing. It wasn't something like one day you heard something and you said, gee, I have to do that. It was that you were surrounded embedded in music.
That is correct. However, my sister, who is 8.5 years older, started to attend music school, which at that time was possible. If one was a good student, one could go to both schools, the regular elementary school and then the music school. And the schedule was pretty heavy duty because it was basically being in school all day. But I loved what she was doing, and she taught me. I was 4 years old. She taught me how to play for Elise, the Beethoven piece that everybody likes to play. And I learned that with, two hands, and my feet couldn't even touch anything, and the floor or anything. And I remember how I was playing it, and then my sister took me to her music teachers at the school, which was, a big deal. Those Hungarian buildings with tall windows and parquets and big doors. So I was ushered in, and she showed me off, and I was playing, Furley's the two hands, and I felt magic, and everybody looked at my hands, and I felt like I was making magic in the air. And so that translated, I think, later into how I approached work with synthesizers and movement and multimedia and all this other stuff.
Did you have a music teacher at that time who you would call a major influence or a mentor on your career?
Well, I did start music school at 6.5. It was a tight call between ballet and music. And I had a dedicated piano teacher and then solfege and, a little theory and everything else that goes within, starting a music school. But I also attended elementary school. So it was between, being enamored with my elementary school teachers and music piano teachers. It was hard to pick a favorite, but I would actually single out my sister at the time because she would play me everything that she was listening to as a teenager, and that included everything from Led Zeppelin to progressive rock. And I knew a lot of that vocabulary at a very young age. And now looking back at what I have created thus far, I can definitely hear the influence of progressive rock in my structures.
Were you there during the war?
Well, I was a gullible, student who was just about to finish undergrad studies, and I never had a coffee with my professor at the academy, my composition professor. Things were very formal at the time, and I remember approaching him to ask about graduate school, and we had coffee, and he told me that I should that he would love to have me as a student, but that I should seek further education abroad. And that is how I started applying to schools in the US. So at the time when the war broke out, I had already been accepted into one of the first, the first multimedia program in the US at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And as the war was starting, I found myself not being able to leave right away. And then through the help of the Soros Foundation and a plethora of coincidences and things I'm going to make a movie once about, I hope, I was able to leave 3 months into the shelling of the city, and then get a one-way ticket and start in the fall. The war broke out in April, and I was able to actually start on time in the US that year.
As they say, timing is everything.
Yes, and I was applying to schools not knowing that there would be this major upheaval. And actually, when it started, there were, people on the streets and demonstrations, and we were, my friends, the intelligentsia, we thought we were smarter than, what these sliced bread or something. We would, be sipping our cappuccinos, looking through the glass windows, thinking, what is going on here? This will probably stop in 2 weeks and everything will be sorted out. And it didn't. And, I was able to leave with a little satchel, not even a suitcase, and, never came back until 4 years later. So we were all very naive at the time because Sarajevo was such a multicultural place. We thought that we were exempt from, the of nationalism and war. So that was a rude awakening, and my generation from that period is literally all over the world. and we have all gained education and things we do in our lives since the transplant. And now luckily we are connected and give back and uphold some of the values of how we grew up, and want to help Bosnia and Herzegovina, in raising the boats and culture and cultural planning and arts and collaborations.
So you go back every so often?
I go back every summer.
Well, let's talk a bit about your music. Of course, I've watched your videos on YouTube. It's really compelling music. But my impression was, and see if I'm correct on this, almost everything that you do has some kind of electronic intervention, that even the violins, when they play, are mic'd, and sometimes you change the sound of the violin. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. The violin you mentioned, let's start here and then I'll rewind. The violin you mentioned with altered sound, it actually is actually an electric violin. It's a specific brand of electric violins. They're called Vipers, and there's one place in Long Island where they make them, and they have one extra string. So instead of four, they have five strings, and they really sound like nothing without some doctoring. So with them, I can get an electric sound of electronic source, but I get the physicality of the playing and the string. And then I run the sound through some boxes and various things to enhance the sound to where I think it fits my context. So that is the alteration of the violin sound. Another way of working with strings for me has been strings with tape, electronic sound that comes from an outside source that the strings play along with, and have to know, note to note, how they sit with the soundtrack. The third way of working is live on stage, for instance, with me playing the Moog synthesizer, which is an electronic source. So it's not tape, but it's live. And then the violinist is mic'd and we play together. So that's another way of delivering sound of strings with an electronic component. Now, why do I add an electronic component? Because I always was interested in sound. As a teenager, as I mentioned, I had wanted to produce my sound so that I wouldn't be in a situation where I compose everything and then I give it over to engineers and producers and they record it, they do the mic placement. If there's electronic stuff, they add that from my tape or whichever, and then they do the final bow on the product. I wanted to know exactly what is going on so that at least I have the vocabulary to tell them about the inner workings of the sound. And so for me, it wasn't just about acoustic sound and what I had learned through my training in classical music and ethnic music idioms to some extent. It was about seeking a language that ushers in the future. And for me, at the time, it was the combination of these two worlds. And I think I still do my work within the electroacoustic context, but I do involve other mediums as well when appropriate, such as contemporary dance or video art or performance with interactive electronic tools on stage.
All of your music is written out?
Yes.
Is there any improvisational component to it?
That's a very good question, because one could think that there is quite a bit of improvisation in how the pieces land on one's psyche, but actually all the instruments have their parts notated. And if I am doing electronics live, I know the part beginning to end, and it is always the same. So if I perform one piece with electronics at different venues, I will be live on electronics, but the electronics will be always the part that I have constructed. I am a big structuralist, but at the same time, I'm obsessed with timbre. So that timbre consideration is fine-tuned on stage, because I then mix my sound on stage. So the part is the same, but how it actually is projected into the space for the listeners depends on the space itself and the kind of playback system I have, speaker configuration, microphones, distances, and so on. So yeah, I think that is a very good question. And I sometimes, but very rarely, if I know the instrumentalist and I know the musical idioms that they are comfortable with, I would then leave them 30 to 50 seconds to do something, maybe at the very end or within the time that I prescribed. So there is very little improvisation, and the parts are notated as they would be within any chamber group, if we are talking chamber ensembles.
So you kind of give them an opportunity to do their own cadenza.
Yes, a cadenza, or if you know, there is a room within sections to add something. If I like the player, I would then work with them on that. But you know, my how do I say, concern is always the sound. What is the totality of that going to be like for the listener? So it is challenging for me to create a piece, put it on paper, and give it away. In other words, a string quartet in Dallas may not, if they haven't worked with me in training them how to do the piece, and if they have an electronic part, I wouldn't dare, you know, let that be performed live. I would need to know what they're doing with it, and so it is somewhat limiting, but at the same time, when it's right, it's glorious to me, at least.
Do you handwrite out the score, or do you use a computer-based program to help you write it out?
That's a very good question. So my revered professor at the Academy of Music in Sarajevo taught me how to, you know, write by hand, and how to organize my pages, and how to engrave, quote unquote. And so when I came to do my graduate studies, I didn't even know how to turn on a computer. Like, that was not part of my training. So, you know, I would stay up until 5 a.m. and read manuals. And that was a wonderful antidote to all the CNN news at the time of the war in my home country. So that was my sanity, you know, moment, reading manuals. And to answer your question, I did learn how to use notation in at that time finale. Now I'm more Sibelius user. Everything worked out pretty well until I was part of this ASCAP workshop at NYU, where I was hoping to get involved in some way, because I was living in Boston at the time. And so I got selected to be part of this film scoring workshop. ASCAP is the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. And I belong to that organization as a writer and publisher. And this was in 2021. And so I came and gleefully joined the workshop. And for some reason, thinking that I have all the chops in the world, I decided to write for this orchestra, for this film cue, by hand, because I thought, I will organize my thoughts. I know how to do this. I've had experience in that, as well as using programs. And so what had happened, yes, I was able to deliver what I had to deliver, but all my colleagues were doing everything much faster. So I remember drinking gallons of green tea and basically not sleeping for 7 days in order to do this. And then I asked myself, why did I do this to myself? You know, what was I trying to prove? In other words, it is nice to know how to write by hand, but it is definitely much faster, and one can output more by using computer notation programs.
Are you the kind of person that will be out to dinner and you have a thought about a piece and you write it down in a notebook and take it home? Or when you're confronted with the blank page, do you just start in? Or is it some combination of both?
That is a very good question. Well, a page is a mediator. I tend to like to memorize, and I tend to like to either, you know, sync to my smartphone, or in some other way store the musical thought. And I don't store it in writing. I store it either on a device, or I find a way to, you know, have these little caller numbers, you know, the way in which I remember something, like a reminder. For some people it's a place, and for people it's a certain smell, you know, tone of a voice. So I know how to do these little, it's like a computer. I know how to do these little prompts so that I can access the memory of that idea. And it does happen a lot, but I'm also able to tame that, in that when I compose, it's full on focus, and I am able to do a lot, so that I don't have a lot of scattered thoughts, but they still, outside of that focus time, but they still come, and I think being a woman in this, and also, a mother when my child was young, I had to train myself to be a Jedi, to be able to, when composing, compose fully 1 hour. If it's 30 minutes, if it's 2 hours, then wash dishes, then run to do that, then back to do this. And so that was something I use today as well, making sure I'm efficient with my time, my creative ideas. And that's like training a muscle. Some people are of the mind that imagination is something that can be enhanced and trained, and I absolutely agree with that. It's a muscle that one uses, and then it becomes stronger.
With regard to form and structure, when you sit down to write a piece, do you have the form of it in your head before you write it, or does it emerge from what you're writing? Of course, the easy answer is to say both, but anyway, you get my point. Is form something that you think about before you start to write?
Well, thank you for that. Into this equation comes the role of a producer as well as composer. So for me, it's a little more layered, because the idea of sound and how it's going to be produced is part of the process of creating the music and writing it if it calls for that. And I am context based. In other words, if I have a morsel of sound or an idea, or even a narrative in terms of, say, pragmatic music, right? Then I get down to focusing on that. And that is the sort of, on a micro level, that is the start. And if I can resolve that micro and have the right sound, the right idea, the right sort of trajectory with it, then I can develop from that. I rarely sit down and think, oh, this is a blank page, I'm going to write a concerto. It just doesn't interest me in that way, because I don't want to be constricted with the preconceived notions of what composition is. We have fantastic works and teachers, that came before us, but without innovation, we'll be regurgitating the same thing over again. So my form is dictated by how the piece develops. And sorry to interrupt, I go into this quote unquote subconscious state, and then I get out of it and put on my editorial and producer like hats, and then I fix and do things. Then I try not to be too objective and work with what I've achieved. Then again, I put on the producer hat and go back and do it. So it's sort of like a back and forth with between these states, and between the roles of creators and producers at the same time.
So you would never sit down and say, oh, I'm going to write something in, this is an exaggeration, but bear with me, in sonata form, for example. You wouldn't do that.
No, I wouldn't do that.
In essence, what you're saying, I think, is that your music grows organically from your starting place.
That is correct. However, I cannot say that even though I tried, that I have been able to completely dismiss 20 years of rigorous classical training and playing a lot of sonatas, a lot of forms from the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, not to call them all classical, right? Because that's pretty much 18th century aesthetic. So if I'm honest, I would say, yes, I tried to dismiss and drop all that on the floor, but it is in my consciousness, and it does affect how I would approach a solution to something, because I have dealt with sophisticated forms before, either as a player or as a composer. So I let that influence it, of course.
Of course, of course. I had mentioned to you in my email that I watched the video of Once You Were Not a Stranger. Incredibly beautiful piece of music. I listened to it both with the small ensemble and the larger ensemble. The smaller ensemble I thought was much more powerful, in part because I thought the electronic effects were more apparent to me, and I kind of liked that. I liked that sound. What was the inspiration for that piece of music?
No, thank you for that. That is sort of exactly how I would have hoped listeners would react, that they would hear the electronic underpinnings and understand them as part of the expression and that sound world. The inspiration came from an opportunity. Like New York composers will tell you, we are mavericks, and hence the many iterations of one piece. It depends on commissions, budgets, venues, ensembles, possibilities. So Composers Concordance, a presenting organization for new music in New York, through which actually I believe this interview came,
That's right.
Deborah Kay, a colleague of mine, and I believe Jean Pritzker were also interviewed by you. So that and I was on the board of directors for a while. Actually, I was an associate director, and now I am on the board of directors. So the opportunity came through Composers Concordance to write for Ethel. And Ethel is a string quartet that I had loved for years and never had a chance to work with. And they are one of my favorite new music quartets in the US, possibly the world at the moment. And so they were going to play a few pieces by Composer Concordance composers chosen for the event, which was going to happen at Le Poisson Rouge on Bleecker Street in Manhattan. So I was so excited. And so I was going to write the piece, but we all got notified, of course, months earlier. But then it was the time of elections, and at that time Trump had won. And so I was envisioning a time of upheaval and problems, frankly, facing the country, partially because what my personal history was like, and partially because of how the news became spectacularized. It was a very apparent big example of that in modern politics. And so in my fear of what was going to happen, I created a piece in the future where I wanted to be. So if I wasn't going to be part, or if I had to be part of the realities, coming up, I was also going to have this other place that I created, that I have control over and feel good in. So that is the inspiration for the piece. And then the piece was premiered with Ethel, and as pieces were performed, audience members were able to tweet their direct responses, and that was projected on a big screen. And it was a very fun thing to do. And so the audience was engaged, and I was able to read comparisons to British composers like Butterworth and so on. And I was very moved by that, because by creating this futuristic, idyllic, peaceful place, I had no idea that it would evoke such grand comparisons. So I was very humbled, and it was a wonderful experience. Now, out of that premiere then came other opportunities. The piece was played by the Sarajevo Philharmonic. I was able to work with Shattered Glass Ensemble and have that piece be performed by them. And it saw very many shapes and forms, to the point where through Ethel, the Metropolitan Museum in New York commissioned me to create some content in the form of multimedia that could be streamed during the pandemic. So I was, of course, jumping at the opportunity. We were also isolated, craving work and collaborations. And so that is the third, I think, iteration that's on my YouTube channel, with all of us in little squares performing live. And I did my Moog, part in nature, and envisioning that futuristic, calm place.
We only have 2 minutes left. I can't believe it. Unbelievable. Great discussion.
Thank you.
I so appreciate it. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Hey there, incredible viewers. Let's hear it for William and Svjetlana. I think you will agree that was a great conversation. We are so thrilled that you joined us for this amazing interview. But before we say our goodbyes, we want to ask for a little favor. If you've enjoyed the content today and want to stay in the loop with our future interviews and exciting content, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. By doing so, you'll be the first to know when we drop new, exclusive interviews. And don't stop there. Show us some love by smashing the like button. It's a small click for you but a huge boost for us, helping our channel reach more music enthusiasts like you. Have someone in mind that you'd love to see featured in our future interviews? Drop their name and your suggestions in the comments section. We value your input and can't wait to explore new horizons with your help. Now, if you're as passionate about our content as we are, and you'd like to support us in our mission to bring even more fantastic music-related features your way, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps us grow and improve. Just scan the QR code with your phone for direct access to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/AtlantaMusicCritic. For more information about Svjetlana and any resources mentioned in this interview, check out the links below. This is Lydia. Thank you, amazing viewers, for being a part of our journey. We'll catch you soon with more incredible interviews, music, and stories. Your support is the wind beneath our wings, and we couldn't do it without you.